Hi everybody, it's Christian Denmon in beautiful St. Petersburg, Florida. We have a beautiful sunny day outside today. And we're continuing our line of education through divorce series. And today I have a guest, Dr. Jeremy Gaies, who's going to come and help us learn about the collaborative divorce process. Dr. Gaies is a clinical psychologist in the Tampa Bay area. He's also a family mediator, and he works very heavily in the collaborative divorce process. And on a personal note, Dr. Gaies is the guy that I go to when I run into issues for families and my clients during divorces that I just don't know where to turn, and I need some guidance to make sure that as an attorney, I don't screw things up, and make sure that the family's going to be okay when we're done doing our thing. And so without further ado, Dr. Gaies, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, thanks, Christian. Thanks for having me here. I'm glad to get the chance to talk to you and talk to the viewers about how to help families go through a divorce process in a way that's as peaceful and as uninvolved with the court as possible, which is collaborative divorce. So a little bit about me. I am a clinical psychologist, a licensed psychologist, as you mentioned, and a certified family mediator. Over the last 10 years, I've really devoted my whole practice to helping families find a peaceful path through divorce. Currently, I'm focusing exclusively on collaborative divorce, which is an out-of-court process to help families craft their own divorce.
Am I correct that what is so great about the collaborative process is it's a way to try to catch things from the very beginning and help people resolve their issues in a divorce, but also to try to keep it from hurting the family and to put them in a very positive path, as positive as you can after going through what is an otherwise traumatic event?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, divorce is generally tumultuous, disruptive for any family, both for the parents and for the children. But when it goes through a litigation process, where in essence, each parent is suing the other for a certain amount of time with the children, a certain amount of money from the family resources, it gets to be much worse. The children tend to get caught in the middle. It's a very stressful process. It's a very expensive process. And so we're always looking for ways to help families reach agreement, for spouses to get to some kind of understanding that they can put down in paper for how they're going to raise their children, how they're going to share the family resources, and to do that in a way that doesn't involve judges and, no offense, but as much as possible, not overly involve the attorneys. Attorneys are excellent at helping work out legal details, but when it comes to family matters, things such as time sharing, decision-making between the parents, those are things that are really more of a psychological and family nature. And so the more we can put that with the experts who handle that, the better for the families.
No offense with the idea of trying to minimize our role in certain aspects as an attorney, because
Right.
I completely agree with you. You know, there are certain things, you know, the time sharing schedule and the communication between the parents and the decision making that attorneys are not really equipped to deal with those
Sure.
problems. And we don't necessarily help when you have two parents that are supposed to be communicating, and then we're actually a barrier in a way to the communication, because we're having a client that's coming to me so I can shoot an email over to another attorney who's then going to relay the message over. And so I'm completely with you, and that's why we're here chatting today, right?
Exactly. I mean, the other issue is that when there are two attorneys, that means two players have to be involved in trying to work out an agreement. When you use a neutral professional to help work out matters about the parenting plan, time sharing, decision making, as you mentioned, communication, you have just one person. So you don't have as much that gets lost in communication between the professionals, and it's not an adversarial relationship, because in litigation, even if two attorneys really are trying to work cooperatively, it's still by definition an adversarial process. Right. It's also within the court, right? So often there's going to be more involvement in the court. We're looking for ways to try to keep families out of the court and keep them with those professionals for each role that best serves the family.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, divorce, it is a lawsuit. You are filing a lawsuit, just like if you were suing an insurance company, or if you were suing somebody who, whose vehicle crashed, who crashed into your vehicle. It's a lawsuit.
Yes.
And your attorney runs down and files it in court.
Right.
And then your attorney sometimes has to call a process server.
Yes.
Or a cop who then takes the paperwork and then serves it on your spouse, and that's the start of the process.
Right, and the spouse is usually not very happy to be served with papers at their office or at their home or wherever they might be. So it starts the whole process off in a really uncomfortable, sometimes hostile way. And once it starts to go down that track, it's really hard to pull folks back because people become very entrenched in their positions.
Sure.
They feel like they're under attack, and in some ways they are under attack, at least legally. And so it sets things off really on the wrong foot. We're looking for ways to get families to the help that they need to reach agreements early on outside of the court in the most amicable way possible.
Absolutely. And so when we're talking about filing a lawsuit, right? I mean, that is a traditional way of doing a divorce process, right?
Yes.
Okay. And when we're talking about collaborative divorce, I mean, you're saying that, look, we have a different way of doing a different process of divorce that we can take families through from start to finish.
Exactly. In fact, most folks who go through a collaborative divorce process, they don't have to file anything with the court at the start. So there are no divorce papers, there are no process servers. There's an agreement between the two spouses and the two attorneys to work in a collaborative fashion. They sign an agreement that spells out how they will work together. And part of that agreement says that if anyone goes to court, anyone starts to litigate, that those attorneys can no longer represent those spouses.
Sure.
So it keeps everyone at the table working to reach an agreement. And that can happen without filing anything with the court. When they do ultimately reach a resolution and the attorneys draft a collaborative marital settlement agreement that spells out all of their agreements, financial, in terms of everything involving the children, the attorneys can simply go to the judge, ask the judge to sign off on it, and that's the only involvement the family has with the court system. That's a much better way for families to go through a divorce.
Yeah, and in my experience, judges are completely on board with parties and supportive of parties that are going through a collaborative process, and it's basically rubber stamping any agreements that have come in front of them.
Yeah, at least in our jurisdiction, it's about a 5-minute hearing.
Right.
And both spouses don't even have to be there. You just need one spouse to be there and one attorney to represent the case. And in 5 minutes, the judge signs off. Judges are thrilled that collaborative divorce is happening because it means nobody's clogging up their courtroom. It's not work that they have to manage. They don't have to make decisions for families that the parents can better make for themselves. So from the court's perspective, collaborative divorce is all for the good.
Absolutely. And I'm going to want you to take us through the collaborative process. Before we go there, we've mentioned two different types of divorce processes. The traditional litigation, somebody's going to get served, there's going to be a judge assigned right away.
Yes.
And then there's a collaborative divorce process, which we're starting to get into, which is the focus of our conversation today.
Yes.
But I know you're a family mediator as well.
Yes.
Okay. So can you help? Are there any other options that I'm missing besides the two we've discussed?
Sure. There are a variety of options for families. The ideal option, if everyone is really agreeable and it's not a complicated process, is what we call a kitchen table divorce. So that means that the spouses sit down together and they work out an agreement on the finances, on where the children will spend time, on how they're going to handle everything related to the divorce. There are a small number of families that can do a kitchen table divorce, but for them, they don't need you, they don't need me, and they don't need the court other than to file the papers. Other folks need more involvement, but they may not need my involvement or your involvement directly. They may need to go just to a mediator. So I serve as a mediator at times. Many attorneys serve as mediators when they're not representing either spouse. And that is having someone who is a neutral person who will simply try to sit down and help the spouses reach an agreement. Many families can use mediation without having to go through a full litigation process. There are also families that need to have their attorneys representing them. The attorneys may sit in on the mediation, but they still use a mediator to try to get to an agreement. Collaborative divorce is a step beyond all of that. And what makes it different is that it's not part of a litigation process. So that even when mediation is used, it's typically after someone has filed divorce papers. The court is still holding periodic hearings. And the mediation is an attempt to reach an agreement that then can be brought to the judge. In the collaborative process, right from the very start, there's an understanding that nobody is suing anybody. These are folks who are going to sit down with the support of a team of professionals. It may be just two attorneys, but oftentimes it includes neutral professionals, such as a neutral mental health professional and oftentimes a neutral financial professional, to sit at a table, very much like this conference table we're sitting at, and to share thoughts, to share ideas, to talk about the law, but mostly to talk about solutions.
Right. So, and that's a great point that you made, which is even with the mediation process, even when you're operating as a mediator in the mediation process, a lot of people have already filed their lawsuit. They're already involved in that sort of, two different sides. They're already at war, so to speak.
That's right.
And so they enter into the mediation process and they're still guarded. Now, mediation, right? I mean, everything's privileged. Whatever happens in mediation stays in mediation, of course. But it's not uncommon. In fact, it's almost the standard course around here that when we go to a mediation and I walk in with my client, I'll go into another room, a different room than the other spouse and that other attorney, and the mediator will go back and forth, and we never even get into the same room together. And part of that's because emotions are so high, because everybody's been in this process, the litigation process, and that's just the way it is. And what you're telling me with the collaborative process, it's something completely 180 degrees different. You kind of redefine how the divorce is going to happen from the very, very beginning.
That's right, Christian. It really does look different. I'm absolutely an advocate for mediation, so I don't want to in any way suggest that it is not a great process. It's really a matter of matching the process to the family. So there are those families that can use a kitchen table divorce.
Sure.
There are those families that can use mediation, and there are those families that can benefit from other processes. And collaborative divorce is a newer process, but it's a very tried and true process at this point. It's being practiced throughout the world, actually. In fact, the organization that governs all this is called the International Academy of Collaborative Professionals, and it's truly an international organization. So there are collaborative divorce professionals in Italy, in Israel, in Indonesia, in Hong Kong, all over the world. It's spreading very rapidly because it makes sense. When people have disputes, especially complicated disputes, it makes so much sense for everyone to sit down at the table with the support of a professional team and to carve out an agreement that is family specific, that works for that family's specific needs. Not only in terms of parenting issues, not only in terms of general finances, but for example, finding the most tax beneficial ways to divide up their resources. That's something that can happen much more effectively at a collaborative table than through any kind of adversarial process.
Sure, and part of that's going to be the professionals that can help in the collaborative process. And I think you had mentioned a little bit ago the idea of a neutral.
Yes.
Right? Which is the opposite of what we usually see in litigation. In litigation, each side has their own expert. Right?
That's right.
And if I represent the husband, there's the husband's expert, maybe
That's
the
right.
husband's financial expert. And Bob, the attorney, represents the wife. Maybe the wife has her own expert as well. And there's a lot of pressure for those experts to be experts for that party and to, obviously, to present a case that's going to be most beneficial for their client.
That's right.
But in collaborative, we have something that's a neutral.
Absolutely. Now, there are different methods of using collaborative divorce. There is such a process that uses two different coaches or two different mental health professionals, one to support each spouse. That's a form of collaborative divorce that's used in a variety of places in the country. But here in Tampa Bay, we rely very heavily on what we call the neutral coach model. That's where you have one coach, one mental health professional. We use the term facilitator in terms of this person's role, someone who facilitates the whole process. And we also use a neutral financial professional, which is typically an accountant or another financial professional who gathers all the financial information, helps educate each spouse about that, and helps develop options with the full team for dividing up resources or establishing the amounts for alimony and so on. So having those neutral professionals means that everyone's not jockeying for position to make the best argument against each other, we're sitting down, we're looking at the data, we're looking at the resources the family has, both in terms of time, in terms of their finances, and all of these things, and we're helping them make decisions about how they want to design their family's future beyond this process.
Right.
It's all about self-determination. None of the professionals will make decisions for them, but we're going to help the spouses come up with different ways to make it work best for their family.
Jeremy, can you start to take us through the collaborative process? Like, how does it start?
Sure. There are a variety of ways that families might do this, but I'll give you a typical example.
Okay.
So the husband goes to an attorney and says, I would like to hire you to get divorced. And the attorney explains the different methods we talked about for divorce. And the husband says, that collaborative process, that seems to make sense to me. I'm hearing that it's a more private process, it's a more efficient process, and it's a process that helps preserve the relationships within the family. And it's very protective of the children. So the husband says, I like that. And the attorney says, well, has your wife spoken to your attorney yet? And the husband says, yes, she did. And the attorney says, well, maybe I could speak to that attorney and we'll see if that attorney is open to doing this in a collaborative way. The two attorneys speak. They agree that this process is a good one for this family. The spouses sign this agreement we spoke about earlier, the participation agreement that outlines how the process works. The professionals then meet, usually by phone, sometimes face-to-face, and they exchange information about the family. The neutral mental health professional or the facilitator will typically then have an individual meeting with each spouse. And incidentally, this can happen even if there are no minor children. That folks who don't have minor children, who don't have children at all, often choose this process again because it's very private, it's less conflictual, it's quicker than typical litigation. But that information that the facilitator gathers will then be shared with the attorneys, and the whole team, including both spouses and all of the professionals, will sit around a table and they'll start to talk about what are the matters that need to be addressed and what are the options for addressing those matters.
Yeah, and that's outside of the kitchen table model that you had mentioned earlier, which is usually I'm not seeing that because
Right.
people are working
Neither
things
of us
out on
see
their
that,
own.
yeah.
We never see that.
Yeah.
When we get involved, there's usually either there's enough conflict or enough issues that need to be solved that there aren't any other processes where we get everyone around the table that I can think of.
Right.
I mean, it just doesn't happen that way except for what you're talking about right here. And the way this works, I mean, in my opinion, and tell me if I'm wrong, it's because you have the right neutral, the experts that are coming in, the people like you that know how to run the ship to keep things cool so that things don't blow up and nobody makes a mess of things.
Absolutely. It's a very structured process, but it's also very, very family specific. So we can adjust things depending on the family's needs. If we have a family that isn't able to sit in the same room at that point at the same time, we can make some adjustments and still make it work. If we have families in which one spouse lives out of state, we often can do things telephonically with video conference. We can do a lot of work offline, which means we work directly with the professionals without gathering the team.
Sure.
And then we plan perhaps one meeting where everyone's together. I've been involved in collaborative divorces where I've never actually met one of the spouses in person because they participated remotely.
Yeah.
But we still got to an agreement.
Right on. And the reason I'm asking you to tell us about the process, the collaborative process, partly because you're here and you agreed to come and chat with me.
Sure.
But also because you have a book that I believe just came out, right?
Yeah, this came out earlier this year, and it's a book written specifically for folks who are considering which divorce process might work for them. And it describes the collaborative divorce process in detail, really from start to finish. It's written as a frequently asked question book or guide. So each page is a different question that people typically ask about the process, and then it goes on to give an answer to that question. So it's a good initial resource for anyone who's thinking about the collaborative divorce process for their family.
And I know that my firm's ordered a couple of these from you because it gives us something if we have a client that's thinking about the process and we've chatted with them about it because we think the client might be a good fit
Yes.
for this process. it's nice to give them something so they can really understand what it is that they're getting into, and hopefully say that's a perfect fit for them, and then we can move forward.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate that. And yeah, and Jeremy's book is a clear and easy guide to collaborative divorce. And so you're obviously the perfect fit to come in here and chat with us about this. So
thank you.
So I appreciate it. And while we're talking about books, Jeremy's also written Mindful Co-Parenting with Dr. Jim Morris. He's in Tampa Bay too, right?
Yeah, Jim has an office in Clearwater and an office in Tampa. He's a very close colleague and a very good friend of mine. And because we had been working with families going through divorce, and including families with high levels of conflict, we decided that we wanted to have a resource for those families that would help them think about how they want to work together, how they can reduce their conflict, how they can write a parenting plan together, and how they can work as a team for their children's benefit. So we said there wasn't really a book out there that we felt met that need. So we wrote that book, and it's been very well received. I give it out to every family that has minor children so that they can learn more on their own about how best to govern themselves as they work for their children's benefit.
Yeah, this book is awesome. I can tell you it's awesome. We've given these out to families that we think it can help, to a lot of our clients. I'm always going to other divorce attorneys' offices because that's
Sure.
the deal, right? We're either meeting to talk about a case, or we're mediating, or
Yes.
we're all gathered together in a collaborative divorce function where we all need a place to meet. And this book is on almost every attorney's bookshelf, and I think that's a really big compliment.
Yes,
and I think that's like the compliment.
I'm a big fan of reading, of people reading to learn about their current situation. So it doesn't have to be these books. If folks want to find a different book, I encourage them strongly to read, learn about how you can do the best for your family. There's a lot of good information out there, and talking to professionals to get that information from the start is not the most cost-efficient way to do it.
Sure.
The best way to do it is to go do some reading. These books and many other books are available in your local libraries, so you don't have to buy it. You can just go pick up a copy from the library. But I always encourage parents and anyone going through divorce, read about that process. It may be the first time you're going through divorce. It may not be the first time, but the more you learn about it, the better the choices you can make for yourself and for your children.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about what's cost effective, like that's the inspiration for why we're doing this video series, is that instead of me repeating something over and over and over to a client, and ultimately they may have to pay for this conversation,
right?
Doesn't it make a lot more sense to go right to the horse's mouth, so to speak?
Sure.
Find the expert that knows exactly what we're talking about. We'll chat about it, and then my clients can watch it on their own time.
Sure, and I really appreciate that. I think it's a great resource for families. I also want to point out that attorneys who are aware of and open to all the different options for families are a tremendous asset for all of us. So as a neutral professional, I am thrilled when there are attorneys like you who are putting this information out there, letting people know of their choices, so that when they do have to move forward, they can make the best choices possible. So I appreciate your awareness of this. You're making other people aware of it.
Stop.
It's good for everyone. Look, we're all trying to do good in the world, right? I mean, this is not about our making a living. This is about trying to help other people find a path. There are a lot of other things that you could be doing. There are other things I could be doing. But I know that we and our colleagues do this because we really care about helping families find a path out of the jungle. And when a divorce starts, in many cases, it's like being lost in a dark and scary jungle. Having people to guide them legally, having people to guide them in terms of family matters, I think it's a calling for us, and I think we need to take great responsibility in that. And so putting the word out the way you are is wonderful, and I'm glad to be able to be a part of it.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. So absolutely appreciate it, right? Because divorce is it's like a tripwire. If it goes wrong, like it can really go wrong and have devastating impacts on families for years and years.
Even generationally. I mean, kids who grow up with parents who are at war with each other when it comes time for them to have children, they carry those scars, and often they're not even aware of the impact that has on their children. And in turn, it goes even beyond that. So I can't tell you how many folks that I meet who talk about what happened when they were growing up and their parents got divorced and they didn't have a good experience. And oftentimes that's why they choose a process that they feel is going to be more peaceful, more amicable, less disruptive for their children.
Right, and I believe that you wrote, and it's been a while since I picked this up, but I believe you mentioned in here that it's not the divorce that's the problem. And sometimes there's an unhealthy relationship, and it's better for the kids if that relationship is terminated. It's how the parents act after the divorce or during a divorce process that's the real problem, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Not every family can stay together. There are circumstances in which two spouses simply can't live together in a peaceful way. And if they're not able to do it in a peaceful way, that has very negative effects on children. How they get divorced is what determines the children's outcome, not the fact that they got divorced. The research clearly shows that if parents, in essence, follow the rules of working together as a team, not putting the kids in the middle, not using the kids as pawns, not saying negative things about the other parent to the children, that children have very similar outcomes after divorce to children whose parents never got divorced and didn't have conflict. Right. But when you start to add in high levels of conflict or the children being tools in the process, that's when kids really get hurt. And the harm can be lifelong. We want to avoid that. So we want to use every opportunity we can to educate parents of how to get divorced, regardless of what approach they use, and how to be good co-parents to each other for the long run.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for coming in and chatting with me about this and helping educate our viewers about the collaborative divorce process.
It's been a pleasure.
And again, thanks for being available when I have those really difficult questions that I need to find the right path when it comes to the mental health of a client or maybe a client's child, and you've always been a great resource for me and my firm, so I appreciate that.
I'll always be happy to be there. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ben.